The way to change the dominance still that we have on GDP is by enabling the mobilization of civil society organizations, business associations, political parties. There are many forces in society that could be mobilized to push and advocate for this agenda.
Welcome to a new episode of Directions, Navigating Beyond GDP Futures, the podcast series that explores the interconnections between economic growth, human flourishing, and sustainability. I am Andrea Ferrannini, researcher in development economics at the University of Florence and manager of the EU-funded SPES project. In this episode, we focus on indicators. We try to go beyond their interpretation as numbers to discover what they actually tell us about specific situations and societies. These stories that lie beneath indicators inform on the challenges that real people face and can become a useful tool to design policies that efficiently foster sustainable human development. To delve deeper in these topics, we invited Pedro Conceição, Director of the Human Development Report Office of the United Nations Development Programme. Thank you for being with us, Pedro. Before we start, can I ask you to briefly introduce yourself and the work that you and your colleagues are conducting at the Human Development Report Office?
I'm Pedro Conceição. I'm currently with the Human Development Report Office at United Nations Development Programme. And our office has for many years tried to think about the importance of going beyond GDP and what that means in terms of ideas as well as on metrics.
The importance of the Human Development Reports is clear to all policymakers and all people working on the topic since the 1990s. This has really made a change in the debate on the metrics and the policies, but more generally on the way we should conceive our society. In your opinion, why is it so important today that we convince policymakers and citizens that sustainable human development is the development paradigm and the vision we need for our societies across the world?
Well, there are many reasons as to why this is important, but I would perhaps say one that might resonate the most with people is just the realization that people care about many things in their lives. Obviously, the economy is important, how the economy is performing. It's associated to whether people have jobs, what kind of income they are able to earn, but people's lives is not defined exclusively by how the economy is doing. People care about many other things. And so I guess the first idea of human development is to propose something related to this multidimensionality, the way in which we understand progress. So when we say that a country, a society is doing better, is progressing, what does that mean? According to human development, it means that we need to look at several things, not only at one indicator, and one indicator looking at the performance of the economy, and that we need also to put an emphasis on the ability of people to make choices according to the things they value, the things that are important to them. There are some other reasons, more negative if you will, that have to do with the limitations of some economic indicators like gross domestic product, for instance. If we look only at an indicator like gross domestic product, like GDP, it may misguide us in the way in which we decide on investments, because we may forget things like inequalities, for instance. We may not account for the damage to the environment that is associated with many activities that make GDP bigger, but have also negative implications on things that people care about, like clean water, clean air, preserving nature next to the places where they live.
Thank you, Pedro. The role of appropriate indicators and measurement systems is surely fundamental to shape the public and policy debate. What is still missing to fully embrace beyond GDP alternatives and use them for policy design and evaluation?
When we think of indicators, this seems like something that's detached from people's lives and something abstract. But actually, indicators matter quite a bit when we have to evaluate the impact of policies. If someone is in a position of power to allocate resources, more importantly, even if they are public resources, there has to be some judgment or some assessment as to whether that application of resources is going to make things better. So how do we know if things get better? Well, indicators matter. You would have very different ways of allocating resources depending on the kind of indicators that we use. So I'll give a specific example. Let's say a policymaker is in charge of reducing poverty. What kind of metric do we use to understand whether poverty is getting better or worse? One way of looking at poverty is considering that it's something that has to do with the fact that people do not have enough money to live their lives. So an indicator to account for that would be to define a minimum level of income, of money, that a family, a household, would need to earn in order not to be considered poor. And everybody else that is below that threshold would then be considered poor. But it would also suggest that a decision maker would, in a way, solve the problem of poverty just by transferring money and income for those families that are below this threshold so that they move above the line. And if they move above the line, they are no longer poor, poverty solved as a problem. Now consider something that complements this way of looking at poverty, that is our multidimensional poverty index, which is an indicator that looks not at whether a family, a household, has enough money, but whether children in a household are going to school, whether children in a household do not have nutrition deprivations, the kind of assets that people have in the household. With this alternative measure of looking at poverty, you can see a scenario where a household, even if it receives the money, if, say, it's very far away from a school or has difficulty having access to a health clinic, might not be poor in a monetary sense, but would still be deprived because of all of these other dimensions. So the implications that we've seen in our own work when we use these additional metrics that are associated, once again, with a different conceptual way of looking at what we should use to measure and evaluate policies, is that the discussion on eradicating poverty is not then circumscribed only to the Ministry of Finance, because it doesn't have to do only with allocating of resources. It's about giving the household the assets, the capabilities that they need to not only move up, but also to stay there, and more than also to stay above the poverty line, to flourish. So it's a very concrete example as to how concepts can lead to different metrics to evaluate policies that may have very different implications on the decisions that policymakers make.
These ideas resonate very well with the SPES project. In the project, we are taking sustainable human development as our paradigm and combine together the attention on equity, on environmental sustainability, on productivity, on citizen participation, but also focusing on human security. This was strongly pushed in the debate by the work of the UNDP and your office, not only with new evidence, but also with new ideas on how to design policies for human security in a world characterized by several conflicts and increasing violence. Therefore, how can we rethink human security approaches and policies?
I think first it's perhaps important to say what human security is from our perspective. It's something that emanates directly from the preamble of the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, where there are a series of phrases that suggest the importance of people living in freedom of want, not living in poverty and deprivation, but also that they should live free from fear and free from living lives of indignity. So this notion of human security complements and supplements the notion of human development and points us much more in the direction of enabling people to live lives of dignity and not living lives of fear, obviously also not living lives of deprivation. Even before the outbreak of the war in Ukraine and in the Middle East, we had evidence telling us that 6 out of every 7 people around the world were feeling insecure. So you can understand how many people live in contexts in which this security is understandable. Could be perhaps interpersonal security because they're concerned with violent crime, for instance, or they may live in conflict settings where there might be violent conflict. But 6 out of every 7 people perceived living lives of insecurity. And so we need to understand what lies behind insecurity. I think we need an objective focus on understanding these sources of insecurity, and human security concept and approach could help in that regard. The response to these challenges is often framed as something that is related to the field of hard security. And I think that human security, this perspective, by recentering the focus on people and whether they live these lives that are free from fear, want, and living in indignity, rebalances the discussion between looking only at territorial integrity of countries, important though that is, to understanding and putting the focus on the way in which people live.
Thanks, Pedro. In SPES, we similarly argued that we should deal with human security by focusing mostly on people's empowerment and solidarity, along with protection. Before we conclude, what is the key message that you would like to give to EU institutions to foster sustainable human development in their member states and abroad?
I think the key message is that the importance of sustainable human development has always been there. We've been arguing it for almost 35 years. But I think it's more relevant than ever in today's world because we are confronting a world of geopolitical upheaval. Forced displacement is at record highs. So I think European institutions could help to recenter the focus on people, not only looking at the conditions in which people live within the European Union, but also recognizing that what happens in the European Union is shaped not only by the decisions that are made within the Union, but also by how we manage global challenges, climate change, for instance, processes of biodiversity loss, of planetary change. And sustainable human development can give us this compass as to how we design and implement policies within the Union, but also what kind of positions we take or the European Union takes in the international context to enable us to manage interdependence.
Thank you, Pedro. To conclude, I would like to focus on the importance of people as drivers of change. What is the real power of the people to change the system and embrace a similar sustainable human development perspective? And how can we enable active citizenship of people and communities across the world?
The importance of enabling this activation of society is to give expression that people care about this. People care about more than just the performance of the economy. People care about their health. People care about their education. People care about the prospect for their children and grandchildren. Questions of sustainability are not something that is secondary. They are central to what people care about. Different societies have different mechanisms to activate this, and we've seen in history how many processes of social change started in this way, by people voicing their aspirations, their concerns. Ultimately, I think that all the power is or should be in the hands of people. I'll give an example that comes from the work that Amartya Sen did on the causes of famine. There's one way of thinking about famine, people going hungry, as not having enough food produced. But actually what he showed was that usually it's not so much the fact that there is not enough food, but it's more about who has access to the food that exists. He explained famines as a problem of some people being excluded and not being entitled to food. And he also went further and realized that the context in which this happens are contexts in which there is no freedom of expression. People are not able to mobilize themselves or are not able to influence the decisions of policymakers. Every other context in which these conditions are in place, famine doesn't happen. So I think extending to this analogy further, the way to change the dominance still that we have on metrics such as GDP is by enabling that mobilization of many actors in society. Could be civil society organizations, could be business associations, political parties. So there are many forces in society that could be mobilized to push and advocate for this agenda.
Thank you very much, Pedro. That was Pedro Conceição from the Human Development Report Office of the United Nations Development Programme talking with us today. This episode is part of Directions, a podcast series produced under the framework of the project SPES, Sustainability Performances, Evidence and Scenarios, funded by the Horizon Europe program. The objective of the project is to better understand the interconnections between economic growth, human flourishing and sustainability. The ambition is to equip policymakers with information that will guide their strategies for fostering sustainable human development using new evidence about past, present and future performances of the sustainability transition. SPES Scientific Director is Professor Mario Biggeri from the University of Florence, and I am Andrea Ferrannini, a researcher at the University of Florence. You can read more on the interview and the project on sustainabilityperformances.eu.